This program does not provide medical advice. We assume no liability for the information provided on Mind Force Radio. Please consult your physician before beginning any exercise or nutrition program.
This is Roger La Pointe, and I have known Bob Whelan for many years at this point, and he is one of the most intense individuals you will ever meet. Go Mind Force Radio.
From Mind Force Radio, this is Natural Strength Night with Maximum Bob. On Natural Strength Night, we don't talk about the other things Bob likes to talk about. Tonight, we only talk strength training. When I say strength training, I don't mean training like punk-ass goons in the muscle magazines who jacked up on juice, steroids, and PEDs. I mean natural strength. Strength built on good food, heavy weights, and no shortcuts. If you want to learn about real natural strength, weight training the right way, the old school way, stick around. Bob and his friends just might teach you something.
He's here, the host of Natural Strength Night, Maximum Bob Whelan.
Tonight, our guest is Roger La Pointe. I've known Roger for almost 20 years. He was just out of college and working for York Barbell when I first met him. He has a lot of interesting stories about his time at York. We'll be talking about it tonight. Roger practices what he preaches and is pound for pound one of the strongest guys around in natural strongman competitions and Olympic lifting. He has overhead pressed Atlas stones heavier than his own body weight. Roger is the CEO and owner of Atomic Athletic, a great company that was a sponsor at several of my capital city strength clinics. Atomic Athletic makes some of the toughest, hardcore strength training equipment you will find. I've bought many items from Roger, including 4 granite stones, farmer's walk utensils, thick bars, chalk, and many other items. If you want to buy strongman stones, be sure to get them from Roger. Atomic Athletic stones are chiseled out of granite and are not the cheap stones on the market that are made of concrete that crack and break when you drop them. Everything from Atomic Athletic is top quality. Be sure to visit Roger's website at atomicathletic.com. That's ATOMIC athletic.com. Roger, it's great to have you on the show, and welcome to Natural Strength Night.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know you're a big Shemansky fan. What is this huge event I'm hearing about?
Well, Norbert Shamanski, who was once called the master lifter, I think in Iron Master magazine, there's a great article about him. Well, the master is turning 91 this year. And,
wow.
Yeah, we're having a big birthday party for Norb Saturday, May 30th at 5 p.m. And this is an open event. You just have to RSVP, pay for your dinner ticket, and show up. And the reason Norb is doing this at 91 is he really wants lifters, past lifters, and when I say lifters, anybody who's interested in the history of this sport. You know, if they're a power lifter, if they do the all-rounds, if they barely know what the Olympic lifts are, they just started in a CrossFit gym, something like that. That's okay, because Norb understands probably better than anybody, the concept of having a uniting figure who can bring everybody together, kind of like the old-timers dinner that's on the East Coast, but this will be in the Midwest, in Livonia, Michigan. Yeah, it's a fantastic thing. Norb wants real people to get together in real time, face to face, and as he said, the modern terms, networking.
What is your opinion of CrossFit?
CrossFit's probably been the best thing that's happened to Olympic lifting since you had the guys like Norb competing in the Olympics, because it's really brought new numbers to Olympic lifting. I don't know the exact numbers, but roughly, when I was the Olympic lifting advisor at the York Barbell Company, there were approximately 2,000 registered members of USA Weightlifting, which is the Olympic committee, so that you can compete and be in competition, which is nothing. I believe it was the smallest sport in the USA Olympics. Yeah, it was considered a dying sport. They didn't know what to do. And CrossFit came in. I heard that it is now up to like 16,000 registered members. So, it's a fascinating thing to me, because while I'm not a CrossFitter, I understand the basic concept of CrossFitting tends to be a repetitions kind of thing, almost a HIIT philosophy mixed with free weights and body weight stuff, which is, exactly the opposite of something like the Olympic lifts, where you're going for a lift. And technically, you can go out on the platform, do one snatch and one clean and jerk, and you could be done. You get 3 attempts, of course, but you don't have to take them. You just have to do 2 successful lifts, and you're done for a 1 repetition max. So, for me, I find the CrossFit thing kind of exciting, because all these people are falling in love with Olympic lifting sort of as an afterthought of the CrossFit thing, because they push the Olympic lifts, especially things like doing overhead snatch grip squats for repetitions, repetition hang cleans, things like that. Well, these are all training lifts for the competition lifts. And, it's really brought a lot of people into the sport, and the numbers make for better competitions.
I have mixed feelings about CrossFit. I admire CrossFit in a lot of ways. I love their hardcore attitude, and I love how they've revitalized Olympic lifting. Overall, I do like them. The only criticism I would say is that they just have to be a little more careful. They got to find a way to reduce injuries. I think they have some people doing snatches that have no business doing them. You know what I mean?
Well, and quite honestly, they have, just like when I go to high schools, because, I sell weightlifting equipment. I'm, a weightlifter. When I go into high schools, I see a lot of high school coaches pushing the Olympic lifts, which is great, except when some of these guys really shouldn't be coaching the lifts. They've never done them. They don't understand how to do them properly. They haven't spent the time learning to coach. When I first started selling for myself, when I had opened Atomic Athletic, one of my early customers was Mike Gittleson at the University of Michigan, who is their head strength coach, for football, all that sort of thing. And I'm from Michigan originally. I grew up in the Detroit area. So even though I went to Michigan State, for me to sell a deal to the University of Michigan and then also be called in to meet with the coach one-on-one, that's pretty cool. It's like I said, I went to Michigan State, but hey, that's U of M. That's a big deal. So I get called in, and one of the first things Mike said to me is, "So I've done some research on you. I understand you're an Olympic lifter." I said, "Yeah." He said, "So try to sell me bumper plates and bars and get all my football players doing snatches? I said, no. He says, really? Why not? Maybe it's a good thing. I said, you know what? If you've got guys who already know how to do it, fantastic. But personally, it took me somewhere between 3 and 4 years to do 10 technically perfect snatches in a row at 90%. As a football coach, you don't have that time. You've got to get guys, potentially right out of a high school program over the summer on playing Big Ten football. That, I think, just in my opinion, is the error with CrossFit. Some of the CrossFit coaches are really fantastic, and certainly some of the guys they have send around the country teaching Olympic lifting to people are some of the best ever. Fred Lau does it, my coach in Michigan. This guy was in the Olympics 3 times. I believe he's still got the national record for the lightest guy to clean and jerk over 400. As a 165, he did that, and he still competes. From a coaching perspective, Fred's as good as it gets. So that's great, but you are not turned into an Olympic lifting coach with one Saturday morning class. I don't care what anybody says or, what.
Right. I've actually picked up a few clients from CrossFit, because they quit and came to me, so they've helped my business a little bit, but I have mixed feelings, right? I know guys who go there and they love it, and I think overall they're good. They just have to, they're a little too rigid sometimes on forcing the Olympic lift down people's throat who shouldn't be doing them. If they just had a little bit of a backup or something, but guys, I have a 51-year-old woman, and they were forcing her to do snatches, and she couldn't do it, and they were just, anyways, but now she's training with me, so I'm happy.
Well, and you know what? And I have to admit that myself and Roger La Pointe, as the owner of Atomic Athletic, has benefited from CrossFit injuries, just like you did. And
that's right.
Right there, I can say I sell more iron boots because of CrossFit, both because they're a great training tool and because they're great for rehabbing lower leg injuries. And I've sold a lot of Indian clubs because of injured CrossFitters, guys who, do injuries to their shoulders, and it's, to some extent, it's like anything else. When you've got a huge organization like CrossFit, not every coach is as good as every other coach. If you happen to be able to lift at Mike Bergner's place in California, he was, he's one of the best Olympic lifting coaches, and both of his kids, I think, have been national champions and to the Olympics. That's phenomenal. Learn your Olympic lifts there. That is great. You would really be missing out if you didn't. Then there are CrossFit facilities that I talk to where the CrossFit thing is almost secondary, and they're doing something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as their main deal. So nothing against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but CrossFit isn't Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I really don't see how the organization can have this huge range of different things and then also push their daily workouts and stuff like that. It is confusing to me. Is CrossFit good? Well, it can be. I'm not a HIIT person, but HIIT can be good. There are positives with it.
Let's get into that right now, Roger. Let's go to the next question, because I was going to ask you, as a strength coach, can you expand a little bit on your personal training philosophy and where you fit, with all these labels in the field?
Well, that dyno thing and the HIIT thing are an interesting deal. I'm definitely not a HIIT person. The dyno, okay, yeah. I love doing things like stone lifting. So the dyno lifting, that has an interesting origin. I think it really started with Brooks-Kubik's dinosaur training book, which is an outstanding book. And Brooks came to one of my events. I used to sell his book. It really popularized some things like stone lifting, thick bar work, and dumbbells, and the Olympic lifts even, and powerlifting. I think Brooks was a competitive power lifter. Is it good? Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. And I think of myself as a lifter. So what I mean by that is I train to do 1 repetition maximum lifts. I'm not just an Olympic lifter because I like doing a lot of what some people would call old-style lifts, or if you look in old Ironman or Strength and Health magazines, you will see some contests that are called odd lift contests.
Yeah, that's like the USAWA, right?
Exactly. And that all started with the American Barbell Men Association, the ABBA, which was founded by, I think, Alan Calvert of the Milo Barbell Company, but he and Mark Berry, who was one of the Olympic coaches, one of the Olympic team coaches in the 19th.
Yeah, and John Grimmick got his start with him before he went to York.
Yes, absolutely. So, they had something like 55 different lifts in the American Barbell Men Association. Olympic lifting really didn't get back into the Olympics until, I believe, 1928, and there were 5 lifts. So you had the one-hand snatch, the two-hand snatch, the one-hand clean and jerk, the two-hand clean and jerk, and the two-hand clean and press, all with a barbell. And then after the 32 Olympics, they eliminated the 2 one-hand barbell lifts, and it just became the snatch, the clean and jerk, and the press. After 1972, they eliminated the press. So today it's only the snatch and the clean and jerk. Personally, I think the worst thing that was ever done to Olympic lifting was eliminating the press. There was good reason for it, and I get into the history stuff. You know me, Bob, as I drill down into things. So if I'm going to get into it, I really get into it. And so, like the press.
The press was the most popular of the 3 lifts. Growing up, because most people don't realize this, but powerlifting wasn't even invented until the 1950s. But as a kid growing up, I mean, people used to say, because now everyone says, how much can you bench? But as a kid in the late 50s and probably through most of the 60s even, people used to say, how much can you press? That was the thing people asked you, how much can you press? And then all of a sudden, maybe in late 60s, 70s, it started changing to how much can you bench? But I agree. Right about the time they eliminated the press is when it seems like the how much can you bench took over. So I agree. That was a big mistake.
Yeah, and they had good reason for doing it. It became extremely hard to judge. And because
some guys were pressing by bending over so far backwards. They were bending over so far backwards, they were almost like doing a standing bench press.
Yes. And, I know you've seen some of those photos, but some of your listeners probably haven't. It is a strange-looking thing to see because it became almost like a weird gymnastic thing. And
that's right.
you had some countries where at their nationals, they did a military press the way it was done in the 1930s and the way Bill March did it when he clean and pressed double body weight in the early 60s. But then you had guys, especially in the Soviet Union, where they had what was called layback, and it looked like a standing bench press. So whose records were accurate? In my opinion, they should have just tightened up the judging instead of eliminating the press. But what happened, so it's always interesting when rule changes happen, is the guys who didn't have, and women, who didn't have Olympic lifting coaches who really knew what were termed the quick lifts, the snatch and the clean and jerk. Actually Norb was considered the very best ever in split cleans and split snatches, where, today hardly anybody does a split snatch or a split clean. They do a squat snatch or a squat clean. But he was considered just lightning fast. Well, if you were a presser and you didn't have a coach who really knew the what some guys would call the tricks of Olympic lifting, you could do very well in a competition, especially a local level or even a state level competition, if you had a technically legal snatch and a technically legal clean and jerk, but you weren't great at it, if you were a great presser. The difficult part about it. So, then they went to the bench press.
We'll be back with more right after this.
This segment brought to you by VitalNutritionStore.com. Did you know that more than 7 million Americans suffer from coronary heart disease, the most common form of heart disease? Regardless of your age or condition, adding Cardio for Life to your daily regime will dramatically improve your cardiovascular condition. Cardio for Life has been the top-selling L-arginine product in the marketplace now for more than 3 years. It is also the top-selling product at VitalNutritionStore.com. Formulated by Dr. Harry Elwart, the best-selling author of Let's Stop the #1 Killer of Americans Today, Dr. Harry believes together we can prevent and reverse heart disease. Cardio for Life comes in 3 wonderful flavors: orange, peach, and grape, and is gluten-free, sugar-free, and sodium-free. Please see our complete line of natural products at VitalNutritionStore.com. That's VITAL Nutritionstore.com.
Randy Roach shocked the world with the release of his first volume of Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors several years ago. It was a masterpiece of over 500 pages with such in-depth research and detail that it was not only surprising, but shocking and mind-blowing. It was truly one of the best Iron Game history books ever written. He followed that with Volume 2, another epic book with over 700 pages of equal depth and detail. All serious Iron Game fans need to have these books. Please visit Randy's website at randyroach.ca. That's RANDYROACH.ca.
Listen to how Iron Game legend and the Iron Master editor Osmo Kehaw describes the book Supernatural Strength. Have you ever wondered how much real-world experience authors have when they write books about weight training? Who is that person behind the computer? What do they really know about the Iron Game? If you picked up this book, Supernatural Strength, you have definitely come to the right place. The author, Bob Whelan, has spent several decades in the Iron Game trenches training himself, competing and coaching in powerlifting, earning academic credentials too numerous to mention, and thousands of hours of training and instructing athletes and trainees of all levels at his Washington, D.C. gym since 1990. He's not only devoted his life to motivating and pushing people to heights they have never been to, but elevating the trainees' understanding why certain methods work better than others. Bob is one of the most respected and revered trainers in the business today. This book is sure to surprise and amaze you at the same time. Order now at supernaturalstrength.com. That's supernaturalstrength.com.
Don't you think it would be so much easier getting into shape if you had a personal coach? Just like all the celebrities do. Well, now you can. Bob Whelan of webstrengthcoach.com wants to get you out of your rut and coach you to success. He's dedicated to helping you achieve your strength and fitness goals through your hard work and his expert guidance. Bob will help you with strength training, muscle building, fitness, nutrition, and motivation. He'll make sure you achieve your maximum physical potential. You can get one-on-one training with Bob through his website, webstrengthcoach.com. He will develop a personalized program tailored to your individual needs, a program right for you. Bob will give you feedback after every workout. This is old school fitness and nutrition. No fads and no gimmicks. Bob will use proven natural techniques to make sure you are satisfied. So visit webstrengthcoach.com today and let Bob help you reach your best self. webstrengthcoach.com.
Do you enjoy history without social engineering? Reading about our founding fathers? Economics from a capitalist perspective? Wisdom from modern patriots? Welcome to UncleSamBooks.com, where virtues like rugged individualism, hard work, and the American dream dominate. UncleSamBooks.com. Great books for homeschooling. UncleSamBooks.com.
If you want to become as strong and muscular as possible with health in mind, and without lowering yourself to using steroids, the best advice can be found in the classic strongman books of long ago. These are the best books ever written on the subjects of strength training, weightlifting, strongman training, iron game history, and old-time physical culture. Many of them can still be found at physicalculturebooks.com. There you will find good, honest, time-tested wisdom from the great old-time strongmen. To maximize your natural muscular and strength potential, please visit physicalculturebooks.com.
Listen to Ken Manny, head strength and conditioning coach at Michigan State University, describe the book Iron Nation. A masterpiece text on some of the most intriguing and compelling personal stories, iron game history, and gut-wrenching training routines ever put to paper. If you truly love hard training without all the frills of pomp and circumstance so common today, you will love Iron Nation. Written by lifters for lifters. If you love weight training, you will love Iron Nation. Order now at ironnation.com. That's IRON Nation.com.
If you would like to promote your business on MindForce Radio, we would love to hear from you. Please let us know if you are interested in a 30 or 60-second voice commercial or a banner website ad. Please contact Bob using the contact information provided on mindforceradio.com.
You're listening to Natural Strength Night on MindForce Radio.
Roger, when I first met you in the mid-'90s, I can't believe I've known you for 20 years, but you worked at the York Barbell Company. That must have been cool. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was really, really great. It was my first job as a professional in the weightlifting industry, or as they called it, pop culture, the fitness industry, which is not what I considered it. I was the Olympic lifting advisor and export sales manager when I worked there. Yeah, it was really neat. I had just tremendous opportunities to meet people. It really set me up for my business and was a heck of a lot of fun. It was one of those dream jobs.
What was it, your job, the job that Arnold couldn't get?
Yes.
No, because I think you and me talked about that once. I think I saw it on your website too. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that and how you also worked with Jan Dellinger and I think John Grimmick was still working there when you were there too, right?
No, John had actually retired at that point, and that's kind of a weird story. I never had a chance to meet John Grimmick.
Okay.
That I wish I had been able to do. He had his first hip break a month after I started lifting there, I think. It's something like that. And basically quit meeting people.
Okay.
The guy being Mr. America and John Grimmick and all that kind of thing, it's understandable. He's an older guy with a broken hip.
Right.
So I never had a chance to meet him. I met and worked with and trained with or under a lot of guys who knew him. And
Dick Smitty Smith was there when you were there, right?
Yes, Smitty was my coach. And
he's a great guy.
Yeah, Smitty was the best. He passed away last August. But Smitty was technically retired at that point, although he did do specialty tours of the Hall of Fame for people.
Mm-hmm.
But he coached me, and
wow.
I learned so much from him.
Wow.
I could do a book just on the things that I learned from Smitty. He was the greatest. But Smitty also hooked me up with a lot of people. And he hooked me up with Vic Boff. He hooked me up with Bill St. John. I was able to meet John Terlazzo. John Terlazzo, the last guy to break the one-hand barbell snatch record, taught me how to do one-hand barbell snatches. It was,
wow.
How cool was that? He broke the record in something like 1934, and here he was at 84 years old teaching me how to do it in his kitchen.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really neat.
When you were there in the 90s, was the York gym still so accessible? Like you could just walk right into it, or was the security higher then?
Well, that's a funny question too, and goes right into how Atomic Athletics got its name. When I started there was no York gym. It had been closed down, and we were in the building there with the rotating lifter on the plant next door. So there were, until they brought me in, there was no lifting going on at York. They had closed down Broad Street and Ridge Avenue facilities. They still own the property, though, which is a really interesting thing. I was able to go into the original York gym that you see in the pictures. There's that great giant blown up photo of, I think it's Stanzik, doing a clean in on the wall of the Weightlifting Hall of Fame Museum there. And I was able to go into that room before they knocked the building down. It was awesome. It was dangerous as heck, too, because there were holes in the floor. And it was a second floor weightlifting area, which is crazy. Mostly you see weightlifting facilities, and it's on a ground floor in a basement, because if a guy drops weights, you don't want it going through the floor. This is on a second floor. It was nuts. And this is the place that they lifted in the 40s and 50s.
When I went there in 76, and that's when I met John Grimmick, and I couldn't believe how accessible that gym was. I forget how I got there so long ago, but whatever directions they told me, I just walked out and walked right into it. And Lee James, I think who eventually won the silver medal, and another American lifter named Mark Cameron, they were in there training, and I think Smitty was there coaching them. I'm pretty sure it was Smitty, and I talked to him too, the coach, And
I'm sure.
You just walk right in the door. It's like I just walked down the street, followed the directions, walked in. There was no security. Walked in the gym, and there they were. And they were as friendly as can be. And I spent the whole afternoon in there. And I was talking to Lee James and Mark Cameron. They were real nice. Talked to Smitty. It was a great time. I just couldn't believe how accessible it was.
Yeah, and well, in '76 I would have been 5 years old. But I definitely met Lee James a number of times, and met Mark Cameron once, and Smitty was their coach, and he was the guy that people, I would, when I was at York, I would talk to Olympic committee people from other countries, and as well as our own country, of course. And I was sent to other countries and to do work on behalf of York Barbell with them, and did a lot of sales deals and came up with interesting ways to fund things and all that kind of stuff. It was a fascinating deal, but the one thing that was universally my ticket to talk to the actual decision makers is, I could say, oh yeah, Smitty's my coach. And these international level people, you mean Dick Smith? Say, yeah. Oh my God, he's the best coach in the world.
Yep.
And I'd see him in the gym with me 3-4 days a week. And had this access. It was really unbelievable when I think back on it.
I interviewed him for Iron Nation. He put a chapter in for Iron Nation. It was just the information in there. It was so dense.
He actually laid out, edited, and wrote the bulk of the Olympic lifting training and coaching manual that was done in the 80s. And, he literally wrote the book, if you want to use that phrase. And, I've gone through my copy of it, which is just a Xerox copy. I'm so glad I did it at the time. And I can hear Smitty talking to me, saying all these Smittyisms.
Jan Dellinger was there when you were there, right?
Yes, and in fact, Jan was the one who said, Raj, you've got the job that Arnold Schwarzenegger was denied.
Oh, so Jan told you that?
Yes, Jan did.
That is funny.
Probably around 1970, maybe 1971 or two. Arnold, who had already been in a lot of the magazines at that point, he was already, amateur and I think professional Mr. Universe, and he may or may not have gotten any of the Mr. Olympia titles yet at that point, but certainly was a feature guy in the magazine, both for York and for Weider. He had gotten to the United States, and one of the places that he applied for a job was with Bob Hoffman. I don't think Hoffman thought that Schwarzenegger was unqualified. I think he just didn't have any jobs to fulfill at the time. It is kind of a joke that I got the job that Arnold applied for, but it was like 25 years later. So it's a funny thing.
I was laughing when I heard that. I think I actually saw it on your website. It's pretty cool. It's a cool line to have.
Well, I try to keep some things light. Like I said, I can get somewhat intense with this stuff and really drilling down on the history. And, people think that Smitty was all about, lift. But he had a wonderful sense of humor. He was.
Oh, yeah.
He was a really funny guy, and loved watching stand-up comics and so on and so
He was kind of self-deprecating too, wasn't he?
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember when I was interviewing him, I was like, this guy's a legend, but he was so down to earth and so friendly and joking, and he was just a pleasure to talk to.
Yeah, can I swear on this? Is it okay to say some off-color stuff here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If it's what happened, we want to hear what happened, right?
Yeah, this is a really funny story. I first started at York. I was there not even a week yet. And I was in the store on the first floor. They were showing me around to all the equipment so that I could learn the product line for just as background, sort of my onboarding for the job. And this old guy comes in and wearing sunglasses and just coming off his motorcycle, right? And Smitty, I'm guessing, he had to be maybe 72, something like that. And he walks in and he's, oh, you must be the new Olympic lifter they've hired. It's about time. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'm the guy, I guess. And, I was 25 years old, and I didn't know who he was. And the guy working at the desk said, oh, this guy's Smitty that I was telling you about. He says, he's the Olympic lifting coach. And Smitty says, well, yeah, but I'm a cow fucker from way back. I didn't know what to say. I was actually speechless. And I've never been speechless in my life. You've known me. I can talk. And Smitty, and I have this old guy saying, well, I'm a cow fucker from way back. I didn't even know how to respond. I'm sure I said something like, pardon me? And he says, before I became the coach here at York, I used to artificially inseminate cows for one of the local farms. I was like, wow, okay. And it just floored me. I'll never forget it. Smitty could make an impact on somebody. And, I'm expecting this stodgy, I did this and I did that. Instead, I get that. And that's what Smitty was like. And, had there been women in the room or little kids, I'm sure he would have been more laid back. He was a very respectful person. But here I was, this 25-year-old kid, and completely clueless as to who he was. See, Bob, unlike yourself, where you knew that there was a York gym in 1976. You could go to York and say, oh, can I see these guys lifting? Great. Me, in the mid-90s, literally Strength and Health magazine had been closed down the year I started high school.
Right.
So,
and Hoffman was already dead, and the magazine was probably, I think it was pretty much shut down by the time you had new ownership, and Grimmick was like, because Grimmick died in the late 90s, didn't he? So he must have been in the last 5 years of his life when you were there. So the place
it was
totally...
like the last 6 years of his life, I think, maybe the last 3. So
yeah, it was totally changed when you got there, right?
Oh, yeah. When we got there, when I got there, because Jan had been there for years. Phil Redman, who did the artwork, had been there for years. There was new ownership. That's why they brought me on. And they were wanting to get a recertified barbell set and start selling internationally. So because of my political experience and the fact that I was a real Olympic lifter, like I competed, and, at that time, for senior age lifters, there weren't even 700 registered senior age lifters. And senior age kind of refers to, like, competitive age. occasionally you get the master's age guy who's still competitive and the junior age guy who's an up-and-comer and he's already competitive. But basically, I think then, because I changed the rules then a little bit, but it was like 21 to 35 was senior age. So for senior age lifters, there were less than 700 of us in the United States at the time. Yeah. So you think of somebody who is willing to move to York, which I was because I had been in graduate school in Washington, D.C., so it wasn't that far away. Yeah, I may not have even have moved in at York yet because it was so quickly that I met you. I had was living in a rental house in Wheaton, Maryland, and then got an apartment in York. And there was nobody there at York who did the Olympic lifts when I got there. You had Smitty, who was fully retired at that point, and they brought him back on as a part-time thing with the job of
like consultant or something?
Yeah, like a consultant, or I don't know what his official title was, but the only official things that he did were give tours of the Weightlifting Hall of Fame, which was actually falling into disrepair at that point.
Yeah, because even when I was there, it wasn't really disrepair in the 70s, but it wasn't as I was expecting it to be more. Put it that way. It's a little disappointing, So I'm glad now it's I haven't been back there, but I've heard that now it's a lot nicer.
Well, the guys who took over and bought out the company while I was there, where Jan and Phil and I all lost our jobs, those guys actually did invest quite a bit into the Hall of Fame, and they put an addition on the building where there was a gym put in. And I had actually personally helped out in starting to put together the new gym, and then those guys fully bought out the rest of the company and put all their own people in and that sort of thing. But
I wish somebody would take over that company and bring it back to its full glory, It's like, I think they're better now than they were 10 years ago. Remember for a while their bars were breaking and their reputation was just getting ruined. It's like they were just crap, But I think now just recently they're getting better, but it's still not the same. It's like, if you remember Harley Davidson back in the 70s and the 70s, you were just like 2 years old, but Harley Davidson is. Yeah, well, Harley's similar to York. I mean, Harley's been a great name, and then they fell into the same kind of condition that York fell into. And in the 70s, they went bankrupt. But some multimillionaire bike fanatic bought the company out of love. He loved Harley and loved motorcycles, and he bought the company, and he brought it back to better than ever. It's like, I wish somebody like, Kim Wood or someone like that. If I had the money, I'd do it. But if someone who knows the iron game and who has the money, someone who would just love to fix York, I mean, just, not just make them any old barbell company, make them great again. I mean, I would love that. I mean, that would be just so awesome.
Well, the current owner who owns York Fitness International out of Canada, and he's a great guy, I met him when I worked for York. And at the time, I told him he should buy the company. He ultimately bought the company around 2005, I think. And the guys who had bought it out while I worked there had sold it off to a Chinese company, and where they were starting to have problems with their bars and things for a little bit.
Yeah, so that's when the bars were breaking and stuff. I remember. I was like, what a shame this is.
Yeah, that was the Chinese. And it was, when Bill bought the company, and I know all about this because I talked to Bill. I still, I do consulting for him a little bit here and there and stuff like that. Anyway, he dealt with that immediately. And, he's just he's a good businessman. The bars are made in North America again. They're, while he's got a Canadian company, he's just in Toronto. And the York facility in York, Pennsylvania is still there. He loves the Hall of Fame. They still manufacture products there. I shouldn't say they still do. They once again manufacture products there. So, he's been gradually bringing a lot of that back to York. But you know what? When the Chinese, and not to be China bashing, but they did some very stereotypical things when they came in. They bought the company for the purpose of taking the machine shop and all the tooling and taking the foundry and all the tooling and moving it over to China. And when Bill bought the place, it was full of, as he put it, a lot of metal crap. And it really was. And quite a bit of it got melted down into his foundry in Toronto because it, wasn't up to his standards of quality. And since then, things have been great. Bill owned York Fitness International, and he had the rights to sell and produce in Canada, England, South Africa, Australia, and maybe a couple other places. And because I was the sport guy as well as the Olympic lifting guy, I wanted to sell into some of these countries that he had the rights to. I organized, him getting together with the management at that time to allow his products to be sold in the United States and us to sell into his country. It was quite an interesting thing because I found out that he had actually bought the company here in the U.S. from the Chinese. I immediately called him up, and I think I had his home phone number. And he said, "Rod, you're still in the industry? This is great." And I said, "Well, can I be a dealer?" He says, "Of course. Start selling all this stuff." So, today, I've been a York dealer since then. And it was such a negative thing when the new guys bought us out and we all lost our jobs. But I said I would never sell York product again. And, I've been selling it for, I'd say, 10 years now.
Some of the other people that you met there have been tied very closely to Ziegler. Could you give us your input on what your views are about the drug issue there?
Yes. I actually know quite a bit about that. Doc Ziegler, for those of you who don't know, was a team doctor in the late 50s. So when he saw what the Russians were doing, and they were all of a sudden much stronger athletes, but he saw some weirdness going on. And, guys having to be catheterized to pee. 20-year-old guy needing to be catheterized to pee. And he's like, what's going on here? So he quite literally went to the bar after one of the meets with the Russian coaches. And the Russian coaches said, we're crushing you guys because we've found this secret formula and, we're manipulating their testosterone level. And Doc, being a naturally inquisitive person and a researcher, had links to CIBA, the pharmaceutical company, and they came up with a formula for what they thought at the time would have been, as Smitty said, enzymes that were the key to strength. Yep. And with his artificial testosterone, as they called it, where they manipulated the molecular formula. It was supposed to do away with a bunch of SEBA because they had the lab for it. Started trial run production of Dianabol. And, in some of the literature, they'll talk about little blue pills. Well, that's what it was. And Doc Ziegler thought that it would be great to not just test on burn victims, because they were having real problems with things like burn victims. So SEBA had been testing this new formula on them, and Doc said, what if he knew Hoffman, and because he was a team doctor, he said, what if we tried it on people who were the supermen of the time? There were several lifters who would go down to Doc Ziegler's facility, and it was a very simple methodology for the testing. Lightweights got 5 milligrams, middleweights got 10, and heavyweights got 15. And it was scientific testing for the time. For today's usage, oh my God, not even remotely scientific, because scientific methodology and statistics and things like that have really moved on. When I was in the PhD program at SUNY Stony Brook, we looked at a lot of statistical methods, and when I saw this, I'm like, really? This is what they were doing? But a lot of these statistical methods, even the math, hadn't been developed until the 1980s. So, for the time period, the testing was what it was. And very quickly, Doc found out that some lifters were getting these pills from the pharmacy surreptitiously. And they were screwing up his testing, which was based on medical dosages for the time period, because they were already giving it to the burn victims and some geriatrics and so on and so forth. And they were being sold in pharmacies. They weren't illegal at all at the time. Very quickly, the word got out that what was going on with some of these lifters, where they were having immense gains.
Is it true, based on the people you've talked to, that the isometric movement, remember isometrics were big right around the same time, right around the early 60s. Now, I've heard that was a cover story to kind of give a reason or give a reason or an excuse for these sudden swift increases in the poundages people were lifting. Because if they couldn't quite explain how these lifts were suddenly rapidly going up, and they would use the isometrics as a cover story and not say a new pill. Is that true?
No. What you had at the time is you had two totally unrelated events that were happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So whether it was or not, it still was a convenient thing to say then. So.
Well, you had guys doing isometric training.
Right.
And York had invented this idea of the power rack and the concepts of training with a power rack, and which were not new. John Grimmick was doing that kind of training with chains hanging from his mom's attic ceiling.
Yep. And Paul Anderson did that stuff too. Anderson did that, the chains hanging from his trees in his yard.
Yeah, and Bob Peoples did it for deadlifting, where he was, he dug a pit and did partial lifts and isometrics and that sort of thing. And if you look at things like the Kennedy lift, the hip lift, the hand and thigh lift, partials. They had a big 2-story sort of hand and thigh machine at York in the late 1940s that even Steve Reeves used. So you had, and there are photos of this. They exist. So what York did, and it was a natural progression. You had guys like Paul Anderson, who definitely was not taking the drugs when he won the Olympics because he couldn't have. They didn't exist.
Right, they weren't even around then. They were around, but only the Russians had them. I mean, we didn't know about them until the late 50s.
Right, and the drugs that the Russians had were causing extreme health problems. So actually impossible for Paul Anderson to have been taking them. But it was well known that Paul Anderson was doing partial lifts and isometrics. What a power rack is a way to systematically measure and hone the concept of partials and isometrics. And they came up with this methodology. At the same time, you happen to have some guys starting to take the drugs.
Right.
So if people, a lot of people have said that, the power rack doesn't really work. Isometrics don't work. Partials don't work. Well, they're wrong. It does. And you've got all kinds of guys throughout the history of strongmanism, powerlifting, Olympic lifting, the odd lifts, all that kind of stuff, who did that kind of training, and it worked. The power rack is, in Smitty's mind, the single best training tool other than an Olympic barbell for doing that type of work. Now, unfortunately, some of the guys who were being used for the power rack work were also taking the steroids. They showed what were probably even more dramatic gains than they would have had because they were doing both things, both of which actually worked. Now, the problem with the steroids, and this is where Doc Ziegler quickly realized he had opened Pandora's box, but early on, and you still get it some today, you'll have these guys, you'll have people take these performance-enhancing drugs, and then they're sitting in front of the TV waiting for these things to work.
Well, of course you got to lift. Yeah, I mean, like, you don't just eat. No pill is going to make you stronger. You got to lift. It's like you got to give these guys credit. Like when people call me and they want to train, or some people are looking for gimmicks. Yeah, I mean, you have to. Even if you're going to be a Mr. Olympia and you're taking tons of drugs, you have to work your ass off, and you have to have great genetics, because there's thousands of people who work their ass off and have great genetics and are taking the drugs, but only a very few are going to be good enough to compete for the Mr. Olympia. So, they're all drug users, and to me, I don't like them just because they're drug users. But as far as the work and the dedication and the effort, they still have to do that. They still have to work their ass off and be dedicated and work hard and lift hard and eat right and use the drugs. But just taking the drugs, of course. It's like, I can't believe there's dumb people out there who would think that just taking steroids is going to get you big. I mean, I guess there are dumb people out there who think that, right? It's unbelievable. Let's just watch TV and take steroids and get big, right? It's unbelievable.
I collect stupid people stories about the world of weightlifting, and yes, there are people who believe it. So we'll leave it at that. But all of what you're saying is true. Because, for example, the genetic thing, in a very simplistic manner, I can point out to people the genetic thing. I chose to go into Olympic lifting because I was watching the Olympics and saw this is when they would actually show Olympic lifting on television for the Summer Olympics. And I happened to be watching when they had the lightweight guys on, and they said how tall these guys were and what their body weights were. And the guy said at the time, these guys aren't going to be playing basketball. These guys are the strongest guys in the world. And I said, wait a minute, I'm 5'3", and at the time I was about 145 pounds, and I thought, wow, and I was in great shape. I was an athlete in high school and so on, and lifted starting at 10 or 11 years old with my great-grandfather's Milo triplex set. So I saw this and I said, wow, I should try that sport. And it was a conscious thing on my part. And I called up Dr. Bob Sahita, who's putting on the event for Shemansky, and he got me into it just because my dad knew him from college. It is one of those happy accidents that sometimes happens to people. And my dad had lifted, not competitively, but even back in the 60s, he was a Taekwondo instructor in Detroit. And he lifted from, he read Strength and Health magazine and read about John Grimmick and was a fan of all this stuff and used what was my great-grandfather's Milo triplex himself from, on the fourth generation to use that barbell.
I know you're a strong little bastard. I've seen you. I've seen you pick up those rocks. I've seen you pick up those granite rocks, and the rocks like bigger than you.
Yeah, well, and you know what? A year and a half ago, whatever it was, I actually decided, I think it was 2 years ago, I decided that I was going to try for a record that I don't know if anybody else had ever done and probably nobody cares about, but I was going to press a granite ball greater than my own body weight. I clean and pressed 162.5-pound granite ball, weighing, that morning I weighed 160.5 pounds. And,
wow, that's awesome, Roger.
Yeah, it is really cool. So, you had asked about the dyno training and things like that, and do I do it? Yeah, I do whatever works best. What I don't do is drugs. I made a conscious choice to not do the drugs, and they were offered to me in high school, and I said no, and I did research and decided it was the right decision. And then when I met Smitty, because Smitty literally was one of the guys handing out the drugs early on in the testing. But
he didn't really know what he was doing then, though. He didn't really understand it. He thought there were enzymes or something. He didn't know that they were the type of definition that we have now that are steroids back then.
Nobody knew what they were then. And they
thought they were some type of super vitamin or something.
Right. He was a research assistant, no different than somebody working in any lab today, injecting mice with some new anti-plague drug or whatever. So, there are some people who say Smitty and Doc Ziegler were these evil guys. No, they weren't. They were doing a benefit for society, and it just happened that this thing that they tested opened Pandora's box. And, and I know the real story because Smitty was there. I'm friends with Bill St. John, who's still alive. Probably Bill will be at Shemansky's dinner. Bill was Doc Ziegler's day-to-day assistant and traveled around the country and the world with him and so on and so forth. Doc Ziegler, once he realized the Pandora's box he had opened, became against using those things for anything but very specific medical needs and got into different research. And, one of the things that he got into was electrostimulation. and a lot of people have used TENS units at chiropractic offices.
Mm-hmm.
Doc Ziegler came up with what was probably the very best one ever, which apparently was also used by NASA and the U.S. military for exercising submarine crews when they had to be underwater in a submarine for 6 months at a shot. All that kind of thing. In fact, President Kennedy was one of his clients where he did rehab for Kennedy's bad back with the Isotron, which was the name he gave to this electrostim unit. It's fantastic. I've used it myself. There's nothing else like it even today. But, this was a research product that he was involved in. They tried it out. And then the athletes themselves started self-medicating. And, today it's an illegal thing to use. Medically, you can, well, not medically, but legally, you can go to jail if you are a steroid user and distributor that does not have a prescription, and rightfully so.
Yep.
So, the drugs have screwed up the sport. You've got these people who are cheaters. Well, in 1960, they weren't cheaters because they didn't know what it was. But after they found out and they made a conscious decision, and it became illegal to boot, and the different organizing committees, the Olympic Committee and the different bodybuilding organizations started making them illegal and saying, look, if you use this, you are cheating. Well,
the Helsinki Olympics opened up everybody's eyes because the Russians, who got them from the Germans after the war, they were the first ones to use steroids in sports because the Germans were using them for their troops in battle. And then after the war, the Russians found this out, gave them to their athletes for the first time. And then in Helsinki, we're like, holy shit, what happened? Because the Russians, before the war, the Russians sucked. They weren't, they weren't good at all. And then, then all of a sudden, after the war, they're like beating us. We're like, what? Something's got to be going on, right? So we knew something was going on. It just took us several years to figure it out.
Yeah, and the Russians, you have to give them credit for taking the best ideas from wherever they could. Shemansky got the gold medal as, I guess it was called light heavyweight at the time. I think it was a 90-kilo class. Set the world record in the press, the snatch, and the clean and jerk, and thus the total. And he was a splitter. Well, I believe in Helsinki, all but maybe one of the Russians were squatters. Well, they had filmed Shemansky, and they were like, "Oh my God, look at this guy!" The next World Championships, you had a bunch of splitters there, and the next Olympics is all splitters. Well, Shemansky, that style just suited him, and Shemansky has a great way of stating things. He's a really funny guy. One of the best quotes I've got for him, if you're good at something, you should stick with it. That's what I say. That's
a great quote.
It is a great quote. It's
simple and truthful.
Absolutely. And, this is a guy who, was the last guy to lift the Apollon bar. Wow, that's cool. And the guy cleaned it with a clean grip, not an alternate grip like Davis had to use, but and then jerked it 3 times, right in a row. A really amazing thing. But the splitting suited him. Could he do some squat cleans? Yeah, he absolutely could. In fact, I think he did 445 or something for a squat clean and jerk. but he was better with the split. He could also do continental style. That's like, if you look into the USAWA, the All-Round Association rules, you can see how to do those kinds of things. It's pretty cool. But the Russians took things that worked, and they really didn't care too much about the long-term results for their athletes. To say that their lifters had to be catheterized to pee while they're training at the Olympics, that's pretty serious.
Win medals for Mother Russia. That's all they cared about.
Yeah, exactly. You had jokes about, the East German female swimmers and so on and so forth, having to do a sex test on.
Well, they'd be right in style now. Roger, you're a wealth of information, so we're going to have to do this again because
excellent.
We've gone over an hour, and you got so much more to say. I mean, we'll have to do this again and keep this going. And so we're gonna wrap this up, and we're gonna have Roger La Pointe Part 2 soon. And Roger, it was a pleasure to speak with you, and I want to thank you so much for your time. And everyone out there, if you want great strength equipment, you have to go to Roger's website and see his great equipment at atomicathletic.com. That's ATOMIC, athletic.com. And thanks again, Roger, for being on the show.
Well, thanks, Bob. It's been great.
Don't be a flamingo, you have to do your squats. Don't be a flamingo, real lifters work their legs.
That's going to do it for this edition of Natural Strength Night on mindforceradio.com. Please bookmark that website, mindforceradio.com. Bob is always looking for new writers for naturalstrength.com who are old school, hardcore, write with passion, and have a strong anti-steroid stance. He also wants your training questions so they can be answered on the show. Please send your articles and training questions to Bob at mindforceradio@earthlink.net. Thanks for listening. See you next time.